Okay, so are there any questions from Monday's class?
Yes, sir. I have a few questions.
Yeah, okay.
So the first question is that when you are saying that we should not be having arbitrage opportunities, does that so when we are taking that position, whom are we representing? Like, are we a social planner who wants to design an efficient market?
Okay, good. So this is something that I wanted to discuss today. So it's good that you brought it up. Right. So what are we trying to design? See, when we started this course, I think many of you thought that if you are aware of the models and the maths in this course, you should be able to make money in the financial market, one way or the other. But then what we are actually discussing here is how to make the market smart enough or efficient enough so that nobody can systematically make money in the market. So there are no free lunches. What does it mean? That if you are aiming for a higher expected return, you can do that, but you will have to carry a higher volatility also. And typically any individual investor likes expected return but dislikes volatility. So there is this trade-off.
No,
And a
but the
smart
Q.
market will make sure that through any combination or any derivative or any strategy, you cannot create a situation which is riskless but has a strictly positive return.
Okay, but the Q that we saw the last day, that was essentially a martingale Q. So the expected Q is still, so the expectation is still not higher, even if the variance is higher.
Correct.
So
So the martingale Q basically works as a common factor for the whole market because it depends on the market feature. It does not depend on the individual investors, correct? I think that's where the dichotomy lies, and that's where your question also lies, that when the investor is coming into the market, the investor can have their own P, and based on that P, they will take decisions.
own P means?
P is their own subjective probability.
Okay, okay.
So we started out with a probability vector
Right.
P, and that P is definitely subjective, depends on individual perception. So based on individual perception, we take investment decisions. But what is happening if the market is efficient and it has zeroed in on that right Q, the right risk neutral probability, we will see later that what role exactly that risk neutral probability is playing, because it is not really a probability that's the role that Q is playing, it is something else. But anyway, for now, let us think of this objective market-based probability Q vis-a-vis the subjective probability P. Now, individuals will come in and invest if they think that in expected terms, they have a profitable opportunity.
But if the subjective P varies from person to person, then for an efficient market, should not the averaged out be equal to Q?
Exactly. So P will not be equal to Q, but overall average decisions will work out in such a way that in aggregate Q prevails.
Right. That is what makes the market efficient.
That is what makes the market efficient. So an efficient market does not mean that every individual does not find a profitable opportunity, because then the market will collapse. If there is no investment opportunity, the market will collapse. It is saying that every individual investor will have differential information. They will come into trade in terms of their expectation maximization, but on an aggregate, it's a zero-sum game.
But then my question lies in the fact that then if it is, then after the initial public offering, if it is indeed a zero sum game, then why should this market exist? Like, what additional benefit that does it happen after the initial public offering?
Correct. Very good. So the market exists for, well, I can recall at least 3 reasons. So the first reason is the market is really an aggregator of investment, because even though retail investors typically have small amount of money to invest, any real life industrial project takes a large amount of money. And if the individual investors are left on their own, it may not be possible for them to find out the correct project. so that their money is spent in the best possible way. The market acts as the aggregator. The market will collect all these retail investors' investments and put them in a big project in bulk. That is one very important role of the financial market. In fact, the financial market was born to do this, to collect investments and put it in bulk in the big projects where it should go. That's one.
So the financial market makes the investment scenario not only limited to the rich only, but even to the small retail.
Absolutely. So basically, investment is often indivisible. So that indivisibility issue is indirectly sorted out through the financial market. That's one goal. The second goal is important from the investor's point of view, which is risk mitigation. Because if you put all your money in one project, because your money is small, if you put all your money in one project, you face a much higher quantum of risk. But if you are investing through an aggregator, then even though your money amount is small, you are notionally investing in a lot of projects. And different projects will have different outcomes, so it will net out. And because of the standard central limit theorem type argument, the investors will benefit in terms of risk management. That's the second role. The third role is what you said is the welfare angle, but welfare angle not in the way you think. Welfare angle in the way that information is typically the most critical ingredient in any industrial scenario. And how quickly and how cheaply I can get information often differentiates between an ultimate success and an ultimate failure. Financial market has this third and also important role, that it disseminates information very quickly and cheaply.
I did not get the information aspect. How is the information disseminated?
Okay, so the financial market is basically acting as the aggregator and risk manager. Aggregator for the producers and risk manager for the investors. Now, how is this facilitated? Basically, through the investment decision, the financial market is telling everybody which projects are better at any point of time.
Okay. By the fluctuation of the fees.
Yes, so through the fluctuation of the prices, which happens every minute, every second, the individual investor without a lot of work, just looking at one computer screen, can figure out the information flow and the health of projects. So information becomes cheap. That's also a very important role.
So can you briefly repeat the second point?
The second point was about risk management. Is that the one you...
Managing risk.
Managing risk, yeah. So suppose you have 1 rupee, okay? You have 1 rupee and you are looking for a good investment opportunity. So you have 10 possible alternatives. You have done a lot of homework, but you cannot really split your 1 rupee into 10 projects and give 10 paisa to each of the projects, because the paperwork and other things will essentially be, not be commensurate, correct?
Okay.
Now think of 10 crores of people like you, each with 1 rupee. They don't invest individually. They go to the market. The market acts as the aggregator. Now the market is operating with 10 crores of rupees, representing the 10 crore individuals.
Okay.
And now the market can put 1 crore each in the 10 projects.
Okay.
And then the CLT will kick in. So notionally, each investor has actually invested 10 paise in each of the projects.
Okay.
Does it answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Sir?
Yep.
Then how does the market manage risk?
By this distribution, the market is the best user of the central limit theorem. Right? The market is not putting all the money in one project, because then the outcome of one project will determine everything. The market is actually distributing. In fact, the market is optimally distributing. The price fluctuations and the volume of trade, they go with each other. They are linked to each other. When the price fluctuations are favorable, more volume of trade will happen in that particular stock, which means when the market identifies a stock is healthy, more money will flow to that project or more transaction will happen there. So that way, the market is always channeling the aggregate investment through optimal destinations. So is that what you wanted to know? Is it okay?
But if the market is efficient, then uh, the point when P is like, so suppose the price rises, then everybody understands that that this is. So what I mean to say is that there should not be any trade in that case, because if the market is efficient, everybody knows that if I go and taking and then
No,
I
but
can break my argument, but
okay, two things. One is that even if each individual is very smart and their P is converging to the Q very quickly, that is what you are afraid of, correct?
right, right.
Even then, some of them will be slower, some of them will be faster. That is one thing. The other thing is, why do you think that the Q is static? In reality, the Q is not static. Right now, whatever we are evaluating about a project, that dictates the Q, because as I said, Q is determined by the market feature. But the market feature itself, all the risk return profile of the projects, that is not static. That changes.
So you mean this?
So the P influences the Q and the Q influences the Q.
So P is always chasing Q, that is correct. But Q is not a static target. Q is a moving target. In real life, Q is a moving target. We will be studying a static model in this semester because otherwise things become very complicated. But if you think about it carefully, in the long term, over quarters and over years, the Q itself will change because the market features are also.
Yeah, that was my second question I was going to ask. That why are we looking at P first and then seeing what the Q should be for that? It should be the other way around. Like we should have some average subjective probability, and then the P prices should be determined according to that average.
If I had started the discussion about Q without talking about what I mean about efficiency, would it have made sense?
Right. Okay, I get your point. But the question is that we are leaving out some we are ruling out some probabilities because that would bring us some wrong outputs, but they should be ruled out by so the difference between the natural probability, the subjective natural probability, and the risk probability that you are saying. I am advocating that they should be the same, and the prices should be what determine that they are ensured to be the same.
Well, that will tie in with what I am going to discuss today. So just hang on to that question for a minute. So let me start with what I want to talk about.
Just a little bit of clarification. One question. That is that when you say that the first point you gave in favor of the existing financial markets, that is inherently based on the assumption that I would not prefer having two stocks over the one. So there is no there is. So for example, when there are multiple unit auctions, it is sometimes the case that I prefer having two units than one unit in different places. So that is not so. For example, if I buy houses, then I would often prefer that my two houses are in the same apartment or in the same building. Then they being separated out, even if the price is the same. So that is an inherent assumption. In your argument is that that no commodity offers such effect in the financial market.
Okay. So if I have understood you correctly, your question is about long-term assets and short-term assets. Is that what you are actually trying to ask?
No, I'm trying to ask is that my share in A and in share in B, I value that at least as much as my share if I get my investment. If I invest both of my shares in A, even if A and B are even A and B are same in prices.
Yes, but isn't that natural? Because I don't like volatility.
Yeah, but it may be the case that so if I have a larger power on a particular company, for example, then I can influence what decisions it makes on
Ah,
like I have more power on what decisions it makes,
yes,
so
yes.
I can lead it to a more profitable.
Oh, yeah, now I have understood. So the setup we are operating in is a setup where no single investor is so big that it can influence the outcome of the project.
So we are underlying the underlying assumption is that the market is
So
the investors are small.
if you have gone through a microeconomics course before, then the setup we are thinking at the back of our mind is a perfect competition setup where each of the consumers are very small.
Yeah, because the result that we had that there would be no overall gain is very similar to the that microeconomic no profit scenario. So I was
It's
thinking that
not,
assumptions are the same.
it's not only similar, it's identical.
Right.
So if you have done microeconomics, we are in a perfect competition setup where every individual is too small to influence the outcome. So there are no atoms. But there are financial markets which people study sometimes, which are oligopolistic in nature, which means there are very few players. So each player has the power to influence the outcome. But that we will not study this semester, at least not explicitly, but there is a literature like that. So now let me resume our usual linear course material discussion from Monday. So let me share my screen. So Monday we talked about the
Sir,
result.
sir,
Yes.
sir, in the last proof that we did last day,
Huh.
there the proof of no arbitrage and equivalence between no arbitrage and the existence of risk neutral probability.
Yes.
There, in the portion where we proved that there will exist such ray, there I have a doubt. So it will be
Yes.
better if you refer to that portion.
Yes. So I am in that proof. I am in that place. Can you see it on
Yeah.
the screen?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So, sir, in this bracket, where we are considering that W intersection A is a null set, and that will imply G star will be less than equals to 0. So there can be a case where all the elements of G star are less than 0. So in that case, how can we get such a vector so that their product is 0?
No, no, no. See, right now, that is what we are trying to show that it exists. Correct?
Yeah.
We are basically trying to show that it exists.
Okay, so sir, like where we have defined W, there we have said that X equals to G star for some trading strategy H. So we should consider those H for which at least one of the element of G star is positive.
Yes, at least one has to be negative. That is all that I need.
No, I'm saying that at least one of them also has to be positive, because if all are negative, then the product will not be 0.
Ah,
That will be 0.
ah,
That will
all of them cannot be negative.
yeah.
Oh, I understand. So this is where the confusion
Yes, sir.
lies. So this is saying less than or equal to 0. So whoever take the notes made a mistake. So this is not what I meant. This is not what I meant. What I meant was there has to be some negative elements.
Okay. Okay, sir.
Yeah. So that's what comes of using someone else's writing. Anyway, so thanks for that clarification, because I'll have to correct this one. Any other questions on this?
No, sir.
So I want to talk about something called a contingent claim. Contingent claim is somewhat like the basis vectors. Okay. So for the financial market, because we are actually in a matrix setup, finite states of nature, finite number of securities. Okay. So we are basically in a matrix setup, and in such a linear space, we always look for a basis. So this contingent claim is essentially something like a set of basis vectors. What does it do? A contingent claim is a claim that will pay you some amount x omega at the state of nature omega tomorrow at t equal to 1. And in particular, we want to specialize to those x omegas which pays 1 unit of money at one particular state of nature and 0 everywhere else. So I will define x1 omega, which will pay 1 if the state of nature is omega 1 and 0 for all other omegas. Similarly, x2 omega, x3 omega up to xk omega. So these are like my unit vectors. So that's why I say that it is something similar to a basis vector. Okay. So contingent claims are claims which pay you 1 rupee in one particular state of nature and 0 otherwise. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And now if you think about it, if I am able to price these contingent claims consistently, all these contingent claims, k of them, then I can actually price any other return profile. Because any return profile will be some combination of these contingent claims, because they will act like the basis. So any vector can be written as a linear combination of the basis vectors. So for us, an important task is to establish that we can price the contingent claim consistently. So how do we do that? So what would be the price of the claim at time 0? That's what we want to know, the V0. So for every claim, I want to find the V0. Now, as Abhinandan asked earlier, and we talked about this separation between P and Q, the subjective probability and the risk neutral probability, I will expect that my risk preferences will play a role in the price of this claim. Because in my mind, I am using P. But we have already set up a market where there are no arbitrage. There is a law of one price that prevails. So whatever I may think, the market will force an unique price. That unique price is coming from the no arbitrage law of one price root. So we have this following this formal definition. So the definition is a contingent claim X as in this above, X omega like that. The contingent claim X is attainable or marketable. Attainable or marketable essentially means that it can be priced consistently. When is it called marketable? It is called marketable if there exists a trading strategy H such that the payoff profile of the trading strategy is X. So I can set up a trading strategy H so that it will pay me exactly 1 rupee at one particular state of nature and 0 everywhere else. Now, if I can do that, then I already have the law of one price, etc., that we have established earlier, and I can immediately say that if I can find such an H so that the value vector, the value profile of H tomorrow is same as X, then the price should be V0, which is the price of this particular trading portfolio. Is that clear? So if I can find a strategy H which replicates my contingent claim, then because of this law of one price, the price of the contingent claim has to be same as the price of the portfolio I have created today. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And then the price will be unique if we have law of one price, which is implied by the no arbitrage opportunity condition, which is equivalent to the existence of risk neutral probability. So what we are saying is that if I do have the risk neutral probability Q in the market, then for any marketable contingent claim, the price will be unique and the price will be given by the value of the corresponding replicating portfolio. And this is formally stated as this risk neutral valuation principle. The risk neutral valuation principle says that if I have a single period market, the market we are talking about, which is free of arbitrage opportunities, it's an efficient market, then the time zero value of an attainable contingent claim or marketable contingent claim will be given by expectation of X by B1. X by B1, the division by B1 is for discounting. Expectation of X by B1 under the risk neutral probability Q, where Q is any risk neutral probability. Because so far whatever we have established does not guarantee that there is one risk neutral probability. All I have shown is that there exists risk neutral probability, so obviously there might be multiple of them. But the risk neutral valuation principle says that the price of an attainable contingent claim will be given by EQ of X by B1. Clear so far?
Yes, sir.
Is it clear so far?
Yes.
Now let me come to the crux of the matter. Now, if I allow multiple risk neutral probabilities to exist, then one can show that the law of one price will break down. Because I am talking about contingent claims which are like unit vectors, indicator variables. And if I have two different risk neutral probabilities, it's very easy to think through, right? Because EQ of X by B1 will be very easy to calculate because it is non-zero at only at one point. So if at that point I have two different probabilities, the price will become different. So that is the crux of the matter which I am going to formalize now. But is this clear? That now that I am working with contingent claims, I have an immediate conflict with multiple risk neutral probabilities.
Yes, sir.
So that brings me to the final condition. I say that a market is complete. A market is complete if every contingent claim is attainable. So I'm saying that I will call a market complete if all the basis vectors can be priced using the risk neutral valuation principle. If it does not happen, then we will call the market incomplete. So in some sense, what I'm saying is that if there are k-many states of nature, the market is complete if it can cover all those, the whole rank, the whole rank. Am I making sense? Because again, I'm going back to the matrix language. Anyway, so as I write it down,
Can you repeat that, please?
instead of repeating, let me go through the formal structure. It will be clearer anyway, right?
Okay, okay, sir.
Because I'm essentially trying to cover all the basis vectors. Okay, so what is my description of the market? So suppose, remember that this was our payoff structure. This A matrix here is our payoff structure, where the first one is the bank and the rest of them, capital N many, are the payoff structure for the N stocks. And of course, the first column is there, it's a constant column. But these are my payoff profile of each of the securities, S1 up to S capital A. This I call my matrix A. So then the result is the following. Suppose there are no arbitrage opportunities, that's the setup we are working under. Then the market is complete if and only if K is same as the number of independent vectors in A. So A is my payoff structure. A is my payoff structure. So I'm saying that the rank of A has to be K. Now does it connect? Connect between the contingent claim definition and the linear space basis? So I'm saying that the payoff structure is rich enough. It has sufficient rank to cover all the basis vectors. The rank is K. Is this clear, or is there a gap? So just please think about it. Let me know, because this is the crux of the matter. So you are all silent. So do I assume that it is clear?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Anyway, so what I'm saying is that the market is complete if and only if this system of equation H equal to X has a solution for all H. For all X. So it can always produce a solution H. H will be the portfolio, the trading strategy, and X is the contingent claim I am targeting. So I have this A, and I am targeting a particular contingent claim, any one of those X1, X2 up to Xk. So I can find a corresponding H, which you may call the trading strategy, or you may call the solution of this linear system of equation. It comes to the same thing. This linear system is same as my financial market. So if I can find a solution here, I can find a trading strategy in the financial market. That's what this result is about. And this is the completeness of the market. Now, if I have completeness, that means all contingent claims can be priced, then I will immediately claim that there must be a unique risk neutral probability. If the market is complete, which means all the basis vectors can be consistently priced, law of one price, then there cannot be more than one risk neutral probability. And the proof is very simple. So this is stated as a formal result here, that suppose my set of risk neutral probabilities is non-empty. So there is at least one element there. M is not equal to null. And if contingent claim is attainable, then its price is given by V0, which we have already discussed. V0 is the value of the corresponding replicating portfolio. Now, because it's a contingent claim, I can say that because EQ of X by B1 must be same for all Q. So if there is, suppose there are two candidates in M, a Q1 and a Q2. Now, if these two are two different probability vectors, they will differ in at least one component. Suppose they differ in the ith component. Then the law of one price for contingent claim Xi will not hold. The contingent claim Xi will have two different prices because of two different risk neutral probabilities, which would be a contradiction to the law of one price condition. So that's why we say that if the market is complete, that will force M to be a singleton. So there must be a unique risk neutral probability that will drive the whole market. Is this clear?
Yes, sir.
So then where does it bring us to? I have shown that if the market is efficient, like no arbitrage opportunity, law of one price, no free lunch, etc., then risk neutral probabilities will exist, and they are essentially dictated by market features. In addition, now we are saying that if I make sure that all contingent claims can be uniquely priced, they are all marketable, which means I can cover the whole basis vector space, then the number of risk neutral probabilities must be 1. So there must be a unique risk neutral probability. What is this risk neutral probability? Is this really a probability? Not really. This risk neutral probability is actually the price of risk in the market. And this price of risk is unique because all the demand supply actions together determines the equilibrium. And that equilibrium price of risk is essentially Q. So it is not anyone's probability really. It is essentially an equilibrium in the market through the demand supply forces. Am I making sense? So even though we call it a risk neutral probability or an equivalent martingale measure, because we are talking about martingale property here, it is not really a probability in the true sense, not like this subjective uncertainty. It is actually price of risk.
Sir, if we view the market as a system, then we can say that Q is the probability for the system.
Okay, so if you think of the market system as an individual, then it is the probability distribution for that individual. You can think about it like that. Yes, of course, but normally we do not think of the market as an individual. So I thought that it's a better connotation to think that it's the price of risk in aggregate, in equilibrium. Because market is essentially nothing but a mechanism which brings us to the equilibrium or tries to bring us to the equilibrium. All right. So now that we have this unique risk neutral probability, then we can put down a few more definitions which will come useful later on. First definition is, for each omega, Q by B is called the state price. So if B is a constant, then Q divided by 1 plus R is the state price. So it is like the discounted probability. It doesn't make sense. Discounted probability is a nonsensical term, but in terms of the risk neutral probability, it makes sense. We will see how. The second definition is a direct comparison of the market risk neutral probability and an individual investor's subjective probability. So Q by P is defined as a new function L of omega, which we call state price density. State price density. Why is it called state price density? Because Q is, as I said, not really a probability. You can actually think of Q as a price of a particular state of nature. And we are standardizing it with the subjective probabilities and call it state price density. Of course, in order to be able to define it consistently, we will have to consider only those P vectors where P omega is strictly positive for all omega. Otherwise, that division will not be allowed. Okay? So we may not be able to define a state price density for all types of P vectors because P vectors need not be strictly positive. All right, but these two definitions, state price and state price density, will come back to us again and again when we talk about the optimization problem of the investors. So we will, our next target would be actually formulating the optimization exercise for the investor in this efficient market scenario. And for that exercise, this terminology will come in useful. Okay, so before we move on to that, let me quickly go through a few more definitions. Capital Rn is defined as this rate of return, for each of the stocks, and capital R0 is the rate of return, which is equal to small r for the bank. The gain process G can then be written as HBR plus summation of HN SN. And I can also write the discounted price process, SN star 1 minus SN star 0, the discounted gain, as, so this is just a little bit of simplification, as SN0 times Rn minus R0 divided by 1 plus R0. So these are alternative notation for the same thing, but some notation will be useful in some contexts. If Q is a residual probability, then that is equivalent to saying that expectation of this Rn minus R0 by 1 plus R0 must be 0 for every n. That's what we have already seen, that expectation of delta Sn star under Q must be 0. Correct?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we have mentioned that before. So that is equivalent to saying that expectation of Rn minus R0 by 1 plus R0 must be 0. And because this R0 is a constant, we can say that residual probability is same as saying expectation of Rn must be equal to small r. So this is actually a very nice shorthand for the residual probability consequence that we discussed earlier. Earlier we wrote it in terms of delta Sn star, but now we recast it in terms of a rate of return, Rn for stock n, and we say that under the residual probability, no matter what the stock may be, through the demand supply forces in equilibrium, the Q expectation of Rn must be smaller. And that sounds very odd, isn't it? Because we all know that there are good stocks and there are bad stocks. So then how come I have a identical rate of return for each stock, whether they are good or bad? Can any of you tell me why?
If the stock is likely to increase in price, then the increase would be inversely proportional to how likely it is to increase.
Yes, yes, exactly. So today's price will automatically adjust itself through the demand supply forces. If what I call a bad stock is put in the market, today's price will automatically go down and adjust it so that the return on my investment remains the same. If it's a good stock, the price today will be higher. I have to pay more to get it. And if it's a bad stock, I will pay lower. Yeah, you are absolutely right. So that's a good point. So that will bring us to a very important result, an extremely important result in financial maths. What is this result? This result we will bring it up later on again and give it a formal name. The name is Capital Asset Pricing Model, CAPM. So CAPM or Capital Asset Pricing Model is again a very popular, very common and extremely famous model or structure in financial maths, almost as famous as the Black-Scholes, which essentially is a regression equation. So that regression equation I want to explain to you now in summary, and we will get back to this later after we have studied the optimization problem of the investors. Because this result or this structure or this equation, this capital asset pricing model, will be understood better once we have understood the optimization exercise of the investors. Okay, so it's a little bit of simple variance covariance manipulation, nothing to it. So look at this particular object. I want to calculate the covariance between Rn, which is the return profile of the stock N, and L. L is the state price density, remember, Q by P. And this covariance I want to calculate under the subjective probability P. So covariance is nothing but EXY minus EXCY. which I can simplify, and I can show that the covariance of Rn and L under T will be smaller minus expectation of Rn under T. Remember, this expectation is under P, so it is not equal to smaller. So this is not 0. This is smaller. This is like expectation under Q, but this is expectation under T. Now, I want to define something called a risk premium for a security. So what is a risk premium? A risk premium is the extra amount of return that I have to promise you so that you are just willing to take up this investment. Why do I need to offer you extra return? Because if I don't offer you anything extra, you will simply put your money in the bank, get smaller, and face no risk at all. So to induce you to invest in a stock, that means taking up some risk. I must pay you. Risk is bad. So for the risk you are facing, I have to pay you some extra, which would be in terms of expected return. That is called the risk premium for a security. And obviously then the definition is this: my subjective expectation of the stock must be more than the bank return. How much more? By this is the quantum. So this is the quantum that I want to calculate. Exactly how much more do I need to give you, so that you are just indifferent between putting your money in the bank and buying my share. We have already shown that this premium is same as minus covariance of P Rn between Rn and A. This we have just shown above. Okay. So this we are going to use. Now consider a trading strategy H. So because we are always doing investment in terms of trading strategies, take a trading strategy H, which is nothing but this n+1 vector. Now define the rate of return for this trading strategy. This would be obviously V1 minus V0 by V0, which we can write in terms of the H's like this as a linear combination of Rn. You see, this is a weighted average of the Rns and the bank rate, of course.
Just 1 minute. When you say that risk premium is something that that is to be paid to the investor for taking that risk, who is exactly paying that?
Whom they're paying means?
It is paid to the investor so that they take up the risk. And
Right. So
so
this payment is in terms of expected return tomorrow. So I show you a profile of returns tomorrow so that your expectation is strictly more than the bank rate.
So who is this that who is paying the risk premium?
Oh, so this is the firm who wants to sell their shares to get money. Remember that there is a production unit at the back who are selling a part of their ownership to the market to raise funds for investment. So that production unit must prove to the market that our return profile has a better expected return than the bank rate.
Okay, but the firm itself has a better understanding of what it could do than the investor. So there not be a disparity in the information and the market of Lehman scenario.
There will be a disparity, and that is why the market is alive. We had this discussion this morning only. If there is no disparity in information, the market will cease to function.
No, so but that could lead to means. So when we generally see this disparity of information thing with respect to the market of Lehman scenario, that leads to a bad outcome. So here it would not.
So this is not necessarily a market for Lehman, because the market for Lehman thrives on the fact that all the potential buyers have the same kind of preference.
Okay.
Here I am deliberately differentiating between the investors through their choice of P. Their P is in their head. So whatever the firm is offering, some people will find it attractive enough, they will buy. Other people will not find it attractive, they will not buy. All right.
Oh, so the roles are reversed. So the roles of the buyers and the sellers in the lemon scenario is reversed here.
No, not exactly reverse. No, no.
Because there the buyers had the same P and the Qs. So if they found it, so the P was averaged out, but there were many sellers, and only those who were finding that P profitable were selling. So
No. But in the market for lemons, the seller is actually perfectly informed about the state of the product.
right,
Here, even the producer is not certain about the outcome. Neither side is certain about the outcome. In a market for lemon scenario, the bad car owner knows it's a bad car. But here the producer is not certain that my project is a bad project.
but in the bad car scenario, even if the seller does not know, but he's more sure about what his state is, then also that same disparity can happen.
Yes. The producer will definitely have better quality of information.
Right.
But it is not a certainty. Because if it's a certainty, then the investment decision would be binary. It is usually not like that. Okay, so coming back to this thing, so I define the return rate of the portfolio by this combination 1.32. So now I will use this earlier algebraic expression. So I have this EP of RH minus R must also be equal to minus covariance of RH and L, using the same equation as above here. I am using it, plugging in RH for RM. Now take another portfolio H prime. It's a very particular portfolio, a portfolio that generates a very unusual claim. The claim is same as A plus BL, where L is the state price density. So H prime is a portfolio that essentially replicates the state price density, Q by P, for each state of nature. And I am imposing B not to be 0, because otherwise it would be a constant. B is not 0. Okay, so H prime is a very peculiar portfolio, very particular portfolio that replicates the state price density. I want it because, just note that in this covariance expression, I have L. So I want a portfolio representing L. So that I call H prime. Now, once I have H prime, I can immediately say that if I look at the covariance between RH prime and L, because they generate the same scenarios, it will be same as V0 prime, which is the price of H prime today, divided by B. This is for scaling, and covariance between RH and RH prime. I'm sorry. Again, this is RH. So this is a mistake. So this is RH. Return of the portfolio H and L would be same as, so because L and H prime are similar, so covariance between RH and L will be same as covariance between RH and RH prime. Of course, scaled because I had this B here, and V0 prime is the day 0 price of RH prime. All right, so this is my relation between the covariance of RH and L vis-a-vis covariance of RH and RH prime. Now I can specialize this by choosing H same as H prime, because I want to have the variance expression. If I choose H equal to H prime, I will get the variance, and that will give me this following result, that expectation of RH prime minus R from here, same as covariance, will be given by minus V0 prime by B, variance of RH prime. This variance of RH prime is coming from here, because now both the entities are the same. So this risk premium of RH prime can be written in terms of the variance of RH prime. So what do? I just plug this thing back. I go back to EPRH minus R. EPRH minus R is already known, covariance of RH and L. So here I bring in the variance, and how do I adjust? Instead of variance of RH prime, I plug in the EPRH minus R expression. So if you just check this algebra, it's a little bit of algebra. So all I'm doing is I'm trying to substitute this V0 prime by B expression, this quantity which will appear here. I am substituting this expression by this premium divided by variance. So this premium divided by variance comes in place of the V0 prime by B expression. That's all I am doing. And what have I achieved? What I have achieved is the following. It's very important result in the following sense, that here I have the risk premium for a portfolio H, and this is subjective because it depends on investors' perception. Here I have the same subjective premium for the state price density, because H prime is essentially nothing but the state price density, which is linked to the market return portfolio. And what is the relationship? The relationship is exactly like a linear regression. If you recall the linear regression setup, this premium is same as the regression coefficient of H on H prime. This is the H on H prime times the risk premium for H prime. So this is not exactly the capital asset pricing model, but we are very close to that. We will complete this story later on with a little bit of more idea about the optimization problem. But essentially what we are saying is that we can link all investors' risk premia through a common linkage, and that common linkage is the state price density. The practical importance of this result is not apparent right now, but I can assure you that it will become very transparent later on, and we will then formally call it the capital asset pricing model. Is there any question here? Because I'm stopping today. So if there is any question, let's discuss. Yes.
So this H prime is fixed, right? Since it's related to the state price density.
H prime is not fixed. H prime is linked with the state price density P by Q, and P by Q is dependent on P. P, as I said, P is the subjective factor, right? Sorry, P by Q, not P by Q, Q by Q. Q is fixed in the market, but P is subjective. But what I have achieved here for now is that the risk premium can be translated. The risk premium can be translated to a risk premium based on the state price density. So I translate the problem to the state price density system, where it's the comparison between Q and P that is playing the major role, rather than the actual return portfolio. As I said, the importance of this is not clear yet, but we will get back to this later. Any other questions? All right, so then we will call it a day, and we meet again Monday 10:30.